If we're being visited, and if there's other life out there, think for a moment how staggeringly unlikely it is that there's just one other civilization. So in a universe over 14 billion years old, with trillions upon trillions of galaxies, where each galaxy, like our Milky Way, contains hundreds of millions of stars, what are the chances that we're alone? Virtually zero. What are the chances that in all of that, there's only one other civilization? No, that's crazy. The chances of there being two civilizations in the universe are as slim, and I mean pretty much zero, as the chances of there being just one, i.e. us being alone. So that being the case, what we're dealing with is probably a situation where there's a whole range of other civilizations out there. Some favorably disposed towards us, some neutral, some hostile. Alien abduction, alien contact, alien experience. This is just language, it's labels. The real question here is there interaction at some level between humans and extraterrestrials? And related to that, if there is that interaction, what's going on? Some people, for example, talk about the purpose of this being some sort of hybridization program. Are they a dying race who need to incorporate fresh genetic material from human beings? Did they create us, and are they tinkering with us? This is a version of ancient astronaut theory in some ways, I guess. The ancient gods were our creators. They seeded us here, and now they're coming back. And related to that, the $64,000 question, if aliens are visiting, are they not just coming and going, but are they here already among us?
Where did civilization begin? Mesopotamia, we are told, which leads us back to the history of the Sumerians and the telling of the Anunnaki gods who descended to Earth and fashioned what we call modern man. And what did they believe? They believed that in ancient times, godlike beings descended from the sky and came to Earth. And that is what is the meaning of Anunnaki. Anunnaki means those who came from the sky and down to the earth. And that myth to us, history to them, tells a story of a race of beings that came from another planet called Nibiru. And this Nibiru is a planet that has an elliptical orbit, and it takes 3,600 years for it to go from, let's say, the inner solar system to the outer solar system and then back again. The problem for Earth is that every 3,000 years, Nibiru comes by and exerts a very powerful gravitational electromagnetic field upon the Earth, which causes devastation. And the most recent epic of the Anunnaki history regards the past 3,600 years and the re-establishment of human civilization after the last devastation, which is traditionally called the Flood. Now, why did these gods, what I call aliens, come to Earth? When you read the works of Zecharia Sitchin, you realize from the Sumerian text that the inhabitants of Nibiru needed certain minerals that are on Earth in order to continue their civilization. Their planet is threatened by solar radiation. And the story goes that they needed gold in order to take the gold and transform it into a monatomic form in order to seed their atmosphere so that the gold would protect them from the harmful radiations of the sun as they do their 3,600-year transit. So they came to Earth looking for resources, and they found them. And they found them in the Middle East, and they found them in Africa, which is a mineral-rich continent. They assigned their crewmen to become the miners. And for a long time, the crewmen of the Anunnaki spaceships worked. They were called Igigi, I-G-I-G-I, Igigi. However, the Igigi grew weary. They had not signed on to become slaves mining in dark caves, and they rebelled. And when the rebellion occurred, there was a council of the Anunnaki, Enlil and Enki and the other so-called gods, the higher-ranking aliens. They decided to engineer another being as a slave being to do this kind of work. And so they engineered the first Adam. And there's a very detailed description of how the gods came together. Each contributed some part of his DNA and her DNA. There was a goddess who became the repository for this new life form. So each of the gods contributed some aspect of their DNA to make us more like them. And what is more like them? Knowledge of good and evil, knowing life, knowing the existence of life and death and immortality. And so, this is where we stand. We are only now finding out about human origins. And it is the problem that science has established itself as the new world religion and fears the revelation of these things. It fears the revelation of an antecedent civilization with higher technology than we possess today. It fears the moving of the cornerstone. Another cornerstone of science is evolutionary theory, which is a hypothesis. There's nothing proven about evolution or Darwinianism. Right? Something affected the course of humankind. For years and years, they call it the missing link. Missing link hasn't been found. Why? Because we're the missing link. That's what I believe. That's what Zecharia Sitchin came to believe, because he translated the Sumerian tablets. He was a qualified scholar. He did years of work, and he wrote several books on this, and I recommend them to you if you want to know this in detail. He called the Earth the seventh planet. We call it the third planet. Now, why did he call it the seventh planet? Because he was translating the Sumerian history and the Anunnaki description of the Earth. And since they came to the Earth from outside the solar system, they started counting the planets out there from Pluto inward. And if you count from Pluto inward, you find out that the Earth is the seventh planet in the Anunnaki scheme, although it is the third planet from the Sun in the way we see the solar system. I referred to Maurice Chatelain, who was an engineer with NASA. Maurice Chatelain was a genius, and he found in the Sumerian tablets a whole series of numbers, astronomically large numbers, numbers beyond even our modern need or comprehension. And so he started studying them, and what he found when he analyzed these numbers and divided them by 60, he found that they were the periods of the orbits of the planets, the orbits of Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, and so on, notated to the second. The Sumerians knew the orbital period of Jupiter and Mars, and they notated it in the number of seconds, not days, not hours, not years. They had it in seconds. And Maurice Chatelain discovered this in the late 1960s. And as I said, he was an engineer who worked for NASA, came across these documents, compared them, did his studies, and made this remarkable discovery. So how did the Sumerians know, and why did they need to know and calculate the orbits of Mars and Jupiter in seconds? Only people, beings that need to navigate amongst the planets, need to know how many seconds it takes Jupiter to orbit the Sun, or how many seconds it takes Mars to orbit the Sun. Obviously, in order to calculate and plot trajectories, intersections, interceptions, gravity slings. You do know that we know how to approach a planet and use the gravity of that planet to sling a spacecraft and accelerate it to another place. This has become an art form in our time, and apparently this is something that was known in ancient times as well.
One of the enduring mysteries from World War II was, did Hitler and any of his German compatriots actually end up in Argentina and then perhaps further south in Antarctica?
During the 1930s, the German government, the Nazis, were interested in setting up some kind of base on Antarctica. And that's absolutely historical fact. And they sent a couple of expeditions out there, and at least on one occasion, they claimed an area known as Neue Schwabenland, and they flew over it and dropped a lot of swastika flags on the ice there to claim it as theirs. So that much all happened.
It is well known that in 1938, the Germans established a base in Neuschwabenland, this area of remote Antarctica where they claimed to have found open land, warm water lakes, and at the end of the war, Admiral Donitz announced that they had built an impregnable fortress for the Führer in Antarctica.
The Nazis sent scientists, they sent botanists, they sent a whole slew of people to settle that colony. So evidently they had found a warm place under the ice in which to establish that colony, or they wouldn't have sent all those people. And to have done this in 1938, a year before World War II, means that it was very important to them to establish that colony in 1938, because they had to be busy with war plans at that point. They were going to be invading Poland in 1 year. To have sent all these people to Antarctica, 5,000 miles across the Atlantic at that point, it had to be something very important to them.
In 1946, a British expeditionary force, a military force, was sent to Antarctica to explore the area, and they were driven back with horrible stories of being decimated. They ran into something that devastated the mission and decimated the force. They got word back to England, and it is not coincidence that within a year, the United States government manned the largest military operation ever mounted to go to Antarctica. It's called Operation High Jump, and this was commanded by Admiral Byrd.
It was an attempt to wipe out the German colony in Antarctica after World War II. They sent a fleet of 13 ships to try and destroy the base. There was an aircraft carrier, the Philippine Sea. There were several destroyers. There were troop carriers, and there were destroyers to carry small planes.
While they were in Antarctica, they were supposed to go there for 6 months. They terminated the mission after 2 months.
They went down supposedly for an exploration expedition type of thing for Antarctica. It's true that that operation ended abruptly. It ended ahead of schedule. There were a couple of deaths reported on it.
And there were rumors that they had encountered something in Antarctica that basically chased Admiral Byrd and American military out of Antarctica.
On his way back to the United States, they stopped in Chile. And in an interview with the newspaper El Mercurio, Admiral Byrd made a stunning remark. He said that in a future war, the United States was going to have to defend itself against flying craft. They could fly from pole to pole in a matter of hours. When that convoy arrived back in Washington, Admiral Byrd was taken to Bethesda Naval Hospital. He was held there incommunicado for 5 days. He was debriefed, and he was forbidden to speak in public about what had really happened to that operation.
What happened was, after 2 months of the operation, flying saucers came out of the water.
They were attacked by UFOs that sank some of their ships, shot down some of their planes, and it was such a devastating loss.
They destroyed one destroyer. Supposedly about 68 Marines were killed. And Byrd realized quickly that there was no way he could possibly defeat that kind of an aircraft that could fly, dart in and out between the ships and fly at supersonic speeds. His aircraft were much slower. He couldn't possibly contend with that. So he had to leave. He turned around and left in 2 months after beginning the operation. What has to be discussed is why they set up a colony there in the first place. Why would they travel 5,000 miles across the Atlantic a year before they were preparing for a major war and build a colony there under the ice? They weren't building that colony as a refuge. It was not a place they expected to go to escape from the war in Europe, because they were very confident at that point of winning the war. And they had every reason to be confident because they had tremendous advantage, both in terms of advantage over England and advantage over Russia. The entire Antarctic colony was meant to be a space exploration colony to begin with. It wasn't an escape from World War II. The Germans were building anti-gravity disks as early as 1939-40. It was alien technology. The Germans could not have developed that technology by themselves. And Oberth, one of the German scientists, said that and admitted it. He said, "We were helped." That was his statement. We were helped. And they wanted the Antarctic colony to be more of a scientific space exploration colony. Their plan was to use that colony for space exploration.
There have been a lot of interesting UFO sightings over Antarctica recorded over the years. A couple of famous ones in around 1965. Chilean and British personnel which were stationed in Antarctica recorded some very unusual aerial phenomena there. It still hasn't been explained to this day. There's things going on down there, as there are around the entire world relating to UFOs. If it's the case that Lockheed Martin and other major aerospace companies are moving to Antarctica, all right, if that's really the case, yeah, that's very interesting, isn't it? And you have to ask, why are they going down there? There have been some odd things in the news concerning Antarctica. Right at the end of the Obama administration, it was John Kerry went to Antarctica. Why? You have to ask seriously why. And then it was Buzz Aldrin, I believe, went to Antarctica around the same time. And yeah, that makes me wonder what's happening down there. Now, that doesn't mean that it's ET related. It could mean that there's a lot of things going on. It could be some interesting scientific anomaly or discovery that they're making and that they're going to make an announcement. A lot of possibilities. I'm not yet inclined to jump up and down and say, okay, it's a portal, it's ET, it's whatever. I'd like to wait. But that aside, I think it's possible that there's some other strange things going on down in Antarctica. I mean, look, it's remote. It's easy to do things far removed from the public eye. So all kinds of things are possible with that.
To any skeptic who says, well, these are just stories, these are just accounts, hell, life is just stories. Life is just accounts. The entire criminal justice system, for example, is based on eyewitness testimony. When did we stop thinking eyewitness testimony was important?
UFO investigator Anthony Sanchez published a transcript of his recorded discussion with a retired U.S. Air Force colonel about what he called tall, pale humanoids from one of the planets in one of two solar systems orbiting Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2, which is a binary star system about 39 light years from Earth. It's the one that the famous Betty and Barney Hill abduction case that Betty drew under hypnosis, a system of trade routes that involved a place where it was pointed out to her where our sun is, where Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2 have trade routes with other stars in that system. Anthony Sanchez, in his recorded transcript with the U.S. Air Force colonel, talks about progenitors, that is the word, that the progenitors were and are a tall, some kind of humanoid intelligence that would be the root source of the humanoids in this solar system. The fact that there was some kind of a war in Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2 1 million or more years ago, and that it was between the tall, pale humanoid progenitors and another life form, gray humanoids, and that these two life forms are somehow distributed in this double binary star system of Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2, and that what the war was about, according to the U.S. Air Force colonel, is that the tall, pale humanoids were secretly going to the gray humanoid planet, harvesting genetic material, going back to their planet in the Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2 system, creating androids, hybrids, a variety of slave labor from the genetic material that the tall humanoids were harvesting from the short gray planets. And this word, progenitors, meaning the original root race behind what's in this solar system, involved the idea that whatever the history is that would explain ancient artifacts on Mars, on the Moon, on Earth, and perhaps other bodies in our solar system, it's all attributed in the U.S. Air Force colonel's story to these progenitors from Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2, and that they were involved in constructions on Mars, on the backside of the Moon, the interior of the Moon, on our Earth, and probably other places even yet in our solar system that we have not been told anything about publicly or by whistleblowers. The colonel says, according to the Greys, the humanoids that got into the war with the tall, pale humanoids, to their historical writings, they tell us that the progenitor race came from another star system, Sirius, and that they were chased from there, again by these gray beings, and that they ended up on Mars. Mars was the closest to their own planet from the Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2 system. Mars was the original place inhabited by them in our solar system, meaning they went to Mars first, not to Earth first. But choosing Mars proved to be a major miscalculation. There was a cataclysmic event, according to the Air Force colonel. An asteroid hit that exterminated some or most of the progenitors. But we know that John Brandenburg, who is a nuclear physicist, that he wrote a 2015 book entitled Death on Mars, The Discovery of a Planetary Nuclear Massacre. And this is about the presence of Xenon-129 in the atmosphere of Mars, which has led to John Brandenburg's doing even a presentation at a NASA conference about enough Xenon-129 in the Martian atmosphere to support the John Brandenburg hypothesis that there were 2 hydrogen bombs that exploded in the northern hemisphere, and that there was a compression wave that would have annihilated cities and life in that Cydonia region, where there is the big head, the big Cydonia pyramid, and other structures that are referred to as the Cydonia city. John Brandenburg thinks that this explosion of bombs in the northern hemisphere could go back 1 million years. The timeline is not clear. But if he is right, this might explain what whistleblowers have been telling me for the past approximately 18 months, that our government knows from its own secret investigations that the Cydonia region in the Martian northern hemisphere does in fact have pyramid and other structures that are made out of a composite material which has some kind of a substance not found in our periodic table of elements. Further, that the current whistleblowers tell me that the hieroglyphs and the symbols on the ancient artifacts of Mars match exactly the hieroglyphs and symbols on ancient artifacts and pyramids on the backside and interior of our moon, and that they match exactly the hieroglyphs and symbols on ancient artifacts and pyramids that are under 1.5 to 2 miles of ice in Antarctica, and that the way we have been getting into Antarctica for the last 15 or so years has been through submarine into some part of Antarctica under the water.
70% of the Earth is covered by water, and we've only explored 5% of our oceans. You would think that before we go to the moon or we do anything else, we would know what's under our oceans, what's on our own planet. So for years, I've been researching UFOs, which are coming in and out of waterways. This has been going on actually for centuries. The first UFO documented sighting that was coming in and out of the water was 1067. This has been going on for centuries, long before we had any capability of any travel underwater, let alone in and out of the water, which is still difficult for us. So now I'm narrowing it down section by section, waterway by waterway, trying to discover the best possibilities for an underwater alien base. I found military bases, I've found submarine bases, and some of the areas with all the activity, there just has to be some type of an alien facility underwater. I had the opportunity to speak to somebody who has been on a nuclear submarine. He went down to sonar, was sitting there with his buddy, and this thing zipped across the screen. He said, "What is that?" And he said, "Well, that's what we call a fast mover. This isn't anything biological, and it's way faster than anything that we have." He said, "So it's basically an underwater unknown, and we just log it and stow it away." You didn't see it. There's a lot of activity that comes in and out of lakes, and I don't think that's necessarily a base, but it is a very good hiding place, and it might also be a place where these craft are refueling. I'm trying to focus more on areas like Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico has more activity of UFOs coming in and out of the water, and from what I've understood with my research, they're also coming into the atmosphere through a wormhole and then entering the water. I interviewed Jorge Martin, who is the expert researcher on USOs and UFOs in the Puerto Rico area, and he said for months now, in fact for the past few years, but the activity is picking up more now in the last few months of these craft coming in and out of the water, and he's actually found through NOAA maps underwater anomalies that he does believe are underwater alien bases. So my research is taking me to different areas across the world. I'm trying to pinpoint the best possibilities for these bases and why these areas and why not other areas. This research has led me to Russia, to the Baltic Sea, the Mediterranean, and even as far as Antarctica. There's bases possibly in Antarctica. I'm doing some research there, and it's kind of ironic that John Kerry just came from Antarctica. He said supposedly because it had something to do with the environment. And I think that's just a little bit far-fetched because after he came back, they announced that they have a 35-year ban on going to Antarctica without permission from the UN. So what are they hiding there? I did some research through WikiLeaks and found out that Julian Assange had released some documents that were back from, I believe, from the 1990s about some alien craft that were coming out of the water near Antarctica, a fleet of craft. So it seems like there's something going on there that our government doesn't want us to know, and we've started building our own facilities in Antarctica, trying to take control of the area and possibly share a base with these alien beings. For some reason now, the three major countries, China, Russia, and the United States, three major world powers, they're putting their bases underwater, their submarine bases, their military facilities. I've even heard talk about how they're putting some missile sites underneath the water. So they're hiding everything underneath the water. It's hard to believe, but we've had submarines since the 1800s. And from there, we went into the 1960s. We started building facilities underwater for research. We've built tunnels underwater. We've been building things underwater for years, and nobody really looks underwater. Nobody pays attention. Everybody looks at land. Perfect place to hide everything. As far as alien craft, I started researching that, and 1 in 5 UFOs is water related. with 70% of the Earth covered by water, of course that's where they're going to hide. There's been craft coming in and out of the water in Michigan, the Great Lakes, off of Catalina Island, one of the most active areas in the Pacific coast right now. They had sightings actually at Avalon off of Catalina Island on July 8th, 1947. This is the same day that the Roswell Daily Record printed the Roswell crash. And I started doing some research, and they had several sightings a few days before and a few days after the Roswell crash. And this was off of Catalina Island. So these craft were coming in and out. In the 1990s, they had just almost a UFO flap of craft that were coming in and out of the oceans. These were being reported right off of Catalina Island, right off of the coast of California. Surfers were reporting craft. Surfers go out early in the morning. They're out with the crack of dawn before boats and everything else get out there. While they're watching for a wave, they've also seen craft coming in and out of the water. We have lakes all over the United States where craft come in and out. But what I'm really more interested in are the bases, the alien bases that they have underwater.
It was in 2015 that I got an email from a man who introduced himself to me saying that he had been a naval flight engineer from 1977 to 1997, a 20-year career, of which a good part of it he was stationed with other naval people in McMurdo, the American base in Antarctica. And he remembered that around 1995 to 1997, that he and the crew would be in a big C-130, maybe a crew of 15, 17 people. And they often would have assignments where they would have to go from McMurdo, say, up to Pole, and then maybe over to the Australian camp at Davis on the east side of Antarctica, and that they would have navigation going to Pole. And when they went to Pole, that meant that they would have to cross over the trans-Antarctic mountains that go completely across, almost dividing the big continent of Antarctica. Well, as they would fly toward the pole, they would get to the same place every time called the Beardmore Glacier. And half a dozen different times, they all saw this. There would be silver, glinting, circular craft. They would come up over the trans-Antarctic mountains. They would never cross over into the Beardmore Glacier. Almost they began to wonder, is there some territorial constriction here? But they would be in their C-130 and they would see the silver discs come together in pairs, stop midair, one take off, another go up, go down. But those silver discs never came toward the C-130, and they all began to notice as a crew that they never flew over that Beardmore Glacier, and they would joke and talk among each other, well, what do you think we've got here? These UFOs, are these extraterrestrials, and is somebody keeping them on that side of the Beardmore Glacier like a joke? But there came a moment in 95 to 97, where they got a call. It was a medvac, and it was somebody over in the Davis camp on the Australian far eastern side that had gotten severe burns from some kind of a kitchen cooking explosion. And it was very serious, and they knew that they normally would have a 5.5 hour to 6 hour flight. And they wanted to see if they could cut down that time because of the emergency. And the captain had talked with the crew and said, does anybody understand why we have this no-fly zone about 5 miles away from Pole? That's going to eat up more time. Is there any reason why we can't go through that no-fly zone? And the answer that came back was, it's supposed to be an air monitoring station within 5 miles of the South Pole. And the captain said, we're flying at 35,000 feet. We're not going to be contaminating air down there. this guy over here is in an emergency situation. Let's just go through this no-fly zone. All of the crew is looking down the window, and the man who has contacted me about all of this, that I call Brian S., said, to their astonishment, when they are so close to what would be the South Pole in this no-fly zone, he said it was like a perfect sort of circle hole. And it seemed to have a slant going into it, like this was constructed. But he said the size. They all said it must be the size of a football field, which would be 300 feet in diameter, clearly going down into the ice. Well, when they got to Davis and they picked up their medical person and got it back to McMurdo, when they landed, they said there was a man in a suit. And that doesn't happen in Antarctica unless it's CIA, NSA, DIA, NRO, Intel, or counter-intel. And they are taken together as a crew, and they are said, the man said to them, what you saw at Pole, you did not see. Not now, not ever. You do not talk about that hole. And Brian told me there had been rumors, but the rumors really began to increase between 1995 to 1997. People sitting down at bars or in cafeterias. Under the ice near the South Pole was what people said. Did you know that we've got extraterrestrials that are collaborating with our government and they're down there in that hole? That was the kind of talk. Well, they got an assignment not too long after seeing that big hole that a group of National Science Foundation people were coming in from the United States, about 15 of them. And their job would be to get these scientists into that C-130, get them to where they were going to do the research, which in this case was Marie Byrd Land on the kind of northwest of McMurdo. And they were always used to flying National Science Foundation people in, usually between September and February, which is the summer months in Antarctica, and it was this period of time around 1996. And they picked up these scientists, an awful lot of gear, took them to where they were going to do this research, dropped them off, and Brian said the agreement with scientists was you call every 24-hour period to this number that they had in McMurdo so that we know that you're okay, that there's no medical emergencies or a problem. And he said they got back, and by the 5th, 6th, 7th day, they had not heard anything from these scientists. And then they get the order, something's wrong. So now they go back. And he said when they were approaching, they went in a big circle, going all around the camp, getting lower and lower with the idea that if there was anything moving, people, dogs, sleds, anything, that they would see it either high and then come down low. Nothing. Literally nothing was moving. They landed, they checked everything out. There was nobody there. It was a huge mystery. They went back to McMurdo. Everybody is puzzled. And another week later after that, they get the phone call, same crew. The scientists are back. Get the plane over there. We got to get them out. And the guys on the plane are expecting that these National Science Foundation researchers are going to be clapping their hands and jumping up and down and whatever. They're going to hear about whatever had happened. And they land. And he said the scientists were just lined up perfectly still. They get ushered onto the plane. They're looking down on the ground. There's not a single word, not to anybody. And the crew are looking at each other, and one of them said, they look traumatized. And they had all of this gear, but the decision apparently was that they would get the scientists out first, and get the gear in another flight. So they get these, he thought there were 2 women and the rest men. And he said, Linda, it was so eerie. They've been missing for 2 weeks. And he said they looked scared. They didn't talk to each other. They didn't talk to us. And they kept looking at the ground. And one of the male scientists sat on a chair, and Brian S. was sitting on a jump seat that was looking back at the scientists. And this one man who sat down, he said he was close enough for me to lean over, and he said, I just extended my hand, and I said, is there anything that I can get you? And that the scientist never responded, kept staring at the floor. The plane landed in McMurdo. The scientists were whisked away. Immediately, they went on another plane, and they heard that they went to Christchurch in New Zealand, never to be seen by this crew again. And then, when they were in the cafeteria talking, the words were from somebody who had some association with what those scientists had been doing, said, yeah, the rumor is that they came here to work with what we call extraterrestrial biological entities down in that hole site near Pole, and who knows what happened. They hadn't been gone very long, and men in suits come again, and the whole crew is set down and told, you do not talk about these missing scientists. You don't talk about any of this. But Brian said, the strange thing is, Linda, I was never asked to sign a non-disclosure agreement. So my coming to you in 2015, I'm not doing anything wrong. And I think that you should know that in those years, at least when I was there in Antarctica, we were seeing silver discs. We saw that big hole down in the ice that others rumored was the entrance to a collaboration between what they call extraterrestrial biological entities and our military, that there were National Science Foundation researchers who came in a group, disappeared, and when we went to pick them up, they seemed traumatized, like post-traumatic shock. Now, that was 2015, and I did a recorded interview with Brian, and he was on Coast and Earth Files and several programs. And he called me up in 2016 saying, I'd really like to meet you. We'd never met. We'd only been on the phone. And he said, and you're going to be speaking at the Contact Conference in Joshua Tree in California. I have a nephew in California who would like to meet and talk with you, and I would, so let's meet at Contact. And the agreement was that on the very first night, on Thursday in the summer of 2016, that we would go to dinner. And we ended up in a very noisy Mexican restaurant, lots of tile. It was very noisy, and we even joked, ironically thinking back, if they got a satellite on us or there is a spy in here, it's going to be hard for them to hear what we have to say. And we joked about it. We were there probably until about 10:30, 11. And when we left, it was a warm night, and we all agreed we wanted to keep talking about all of the various UFO ET stuff we were talking about. So we went into the parking lot where they had an SUV that was parked under a tree, and we talked for another couple of hours out there in that parking lot. That was Thursday night. I end up doing a lot of work on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Monday morning, the guys have gone back to their homes. So they're taking me back to the airport to leave, and I get a call on my iPhone. And it is the nephew who was with us on that Thursday night dinner, and he says, you'll never believe what happened with his Uncle Brian. And he says, He got a phone call this morning at work. Now that meant a lot because Brian still works in an aerospace context. You can't call his office. He doesn't give out that number. You have to call him on his private cell phone. And he got a phone call to his office line that I then later learned in talking with Brian began this way. And this is an absolute transcript of what Brian said happened. The voice on the other end of the line said, "Is this Brian?" "Yes, who is this?" I didn't recognize the number at all coming in on my phone. And the voice said, "I want to tell you that what you have been talking about, you need to stop talking about." Brian said, "Well, what stuff is that?" And he says, quote, "We know that you were with Linda Moulton Howe last Thursday night, and we know that you went to dinner at a Mexican restaurant in Joshua Tree, and we were aware of what you were talking about with her and other people, and that your experience that you had when you were on the ice, when you were in the service, we do not want you talking about that. Specifically, we don't want you talking about the scientists that you picked up after being missing for a couple of weeks." Brian said, "Well, how would you know about that? I've only talked to certain people." And the voice on the phone said, "Well, we know pretty much everything." And he said, "Just don't be putting that out there anymore. Certain people would prefer that you not talk about that." And Brian said, "Well, I'll consider that." And the phone clicked dead. Brian, who is very smart, looked at the phone and did something that they could do and called and had a number that he wrote down. When he called that number, it came back as the general phone number for the National Security Agency in Fort Meade. That meant, if you just put it all together, that an event in 1995 to 1997, a series of events which included the disappearing National Science Foundation scientists, by 2016 was still so sensitive that somebody in an intelligence agency in Washington, such as the National Security Agency, would go to the trouble to somehow connect into what was supposed to be a private aerospace office number for Brian S., give a warning, based on having monitored us, something is in Antarctica that I personally think every human being on this planet deserves to know the truth about. And as much as I can report, as many whistleblowers who will come to me and tell me their firsthand experiences, the more I hope that I can share. We should not be on planet Earth with aliens down in Antarctica collaborating with our government, and then having that same government threaten the reporters who are supposed to be protected by the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. Something is wrong, and that's part of what I'm trying to find out in my work.
If any of this is true, if one case is true, this is a game changer. This is a situation where the skeptics have to be right every day, whether it's UFOs, alien abductions, hybridization program, aliens among us, whatever. The skeptics have to be right every day. The believers only have to be right once. And not only does the world change, but the world has changed. The world is a fundamentally different place than we believe it to be because of things happening that are currently hidden to us.
Elon Musk was a surprise guest on one of the panels in Austin, Texas, at the current South by Southwest festival, and he told a big crowd, quote, "We are building the first Mars or interplanetary ship right now, and he's referring to his SpaceX. And I think we'll be able to do short flights, sort of up and down flights, probably in the first half of next year. And that's what will enable the creation of a base on the moon and a city, these are his words, and a city on Mars. It's similar to getting the Union Pacific Railroad across the continent or ships across the ocean. So we're going to try to get you there and make sure there is an environment in which entrepreneurs can flourish. Then I think it, meaning getting to Mars to build a city, will be amazing. But I wonder how much has Elon Musk been read into the MJ-12 alien UFO program? The one that we have all been trying to get to the bottom of, that we know began in 1947 with some kind of an executive order by Harry S. Truman. It's now 70 years later. It would seem logical that Elon Musk has been introduced to some real facts about the alien presence in our solar system, Mars, the moon, Earth, and that it may be part of the reason why he is working so hard to get to Mars with enough cargo and people to actually start, as he calls it, a city on Mars. Well, does he know anything about the alleged history of alien humanoid life on Mars in this solar system? And I hope that you will keep in your mind this whole huge, big other possible backstory as we're going to get more and more headlines about Elon Musk getting ready to launch to Mars with great enthusiasm, apparently by President Donald Trump. What do they both know about ancient archaeology on Mars? And what happens once, if Elon Musk gets there with the new pioneers, like the wagon train that went across America? He gets there with settlers and they are able to survive landing and they actually start setting up a city. Will we on Earth eventually learn about the ancient archaeology on Mars that matches Antarctica and the backside and interior of our moon? These are big questions in this revolutionary time. I hope that we will be told some facts and truth. And we are at a time where more and more dots seem to be coming into place about the fact that we're heading out into space where we've already been, and that other intelligences have been coming into our solar system for a very, very long time.